lack of response on a credible and serious level to official letters which have been sent.
Since heavy chemtrail spraying began almost 2 years ago, just about everyone, it seems, is sick or has been ill or knows someone who is sicker than they have ever been before. During the 1999-2000 flu season, the Centers for Disease Control tracked a 31-week epidemic of fatalities from pneumonia and influenza-like illness. But when actual lab tests were carried out on patients jamming doctors' offices and emergency rooms across the U.S., 70% or more did not have the flu. The CDC says an unknown pathogen could be responsible for high death rates, particularly among the elderly, as well as drastic ailments whose origins doctors cannot diagnose. Thousands of eyewitnesses report sudden symptoms of joint pain, nosebleeds, severe headaches, twitching eyelids, upper respiratory distress, earaches, asthma attacks, gastrointestinal bloating and pain, inability to concentrate, extreme dizziness, fatigue, and memory loss, contracted immediately after heavy chemtrail spraying. Can this be coincidence? Government-sponsored 1-800-FLU reporting numbers suggest that the spread of these illnesses is being tracked, just as similar outbreaks have been monitored during 50 years of covert open-air biowarfare experiments on US, UK, and Canadian cities. Though few people are aware of this fact, it has been legal to conduct chemical biological warfare tests on the American public for decades. Amended in 1997, Title 50 stipulates that Congress must be notified and informed consent obtained from each test subject in advance of these experiments. Chemtrails are not confined to North America. Eyewitnesses in at least 14 countries are reporting spray activity. During 3 weeks in the winter of 1998-99, the BBC reported refrigerator trucks being used as makeshift morgues to help handle 8,100 corpses, mostly elderly, who died suddenly from influenza-like illness. But the media failed to report the giant white X's over Birmingham and London, as more than 91,000 sick Britishers swamped hospitals and ambulance services. This year, the freezer trucks were back in use, in a grim repetition, said the London Telegraph, of scenes outside hospitals last winter.
I would like to read something that I think is interesting. The following was taken directly from the law site at Cornell University. It's becoming very clear that while we are sitting here concerned about Saddam Hussein, and well we should be, our own government may use at its will chemical and biological agents on us without our knowledge. What could Congress have been thinking to enact such a law? This law is listed in U.S. Code 50, Section 1520. It states, the use of human subjects for testing of chemical or biological agents by the Department of Defense, accounting to congressional committees with respect to experiments and studies, notification of local civilian officials. In paragraph 2(1) it states, they shall apply to tested experiments conducted by Department of Defense personnel and test and experiments conducted on behalf of the Department of Defense by contractors. There is definitely something going on. They have made a law that makes it legal for them to conduct chemical and biological tests on us, civilian people. Without our knowledge,
considering that we don't have the ability to order a Navy jet up to trail one of these airplanes, to identify it, or to sample the whatever it's putting out, which would be very simple. It would seem to me the commander of Kirtland Air Force Base could order that to happen. Why hasn't that happened, and do we have any hard scientific data on what it is they're spraying, and keeping in mind and understanding, of course, that they could be changing the spray and the content of the spray from day to day?
It's a difficult question to answer with certainty in terms of what is there. Unfortunately, we are in a position of indirect observation and analysis on the ground. The solution may appear to be simple in terms of having an aircraft there, but you can ask each person in the country and each person in your audience, ask them why we don't have an aircraft up there right now. That question can be asked to every one of us as to why we do not have a direct sampling by aircraft. This does not fall upon any single individual to try and take this on. That airspace is very highly regulated. It needs to be provided and coordinated at an official level to conduct such a test. That need exists across the board, and there is no excuse for it. I can say that I don't have the resources to do that directly, but there's no excuse for any of us not to be asking the question as to why the aircraft is not up there. Unfortunately, given that condition, that it does not exist now, has not been done, what is to be done? And what can be done is to use our methods of analysis available to us on the ground as much as we can to identify what we think is happening. Now, I have gotten involved with an unusual case involving some physical materials that were sent to me in November of last year. This material is really most intriguing. It was sent to me by two separate individuals from two separate locations at two separate times that did not know one another, and neither one of these individuals were even particularly aware of the chemtrail, so-called chemtrail issue. And by the way, while we're speaking of that, just as we mentioned that contrail stands for condensed trail, it's also reasonable to give sufficient explanation of chemtrail, which stand for chemical trail. That's not a stretch of the imagination in terms of what we're speaking of, but formally that's what we would be talking about, is a chemical trail. And this material was sent to me, and immediately was apparent to me that there were unusual properties of this material. These unusual properties include especially the size, the width of this material. This is a fibrous material. It's a material which is white and fibrous in nature. The size of these fibers is really quite phenomenal. It's at the 2 to 3 tenths of a micron level. That's a number which may not mean anything to us unless we put it in perspective. And that perspective is given by the fact that your human hair is roughly 60 to 100 microns thick. Cotton fibers are roughly in the order of 10 microns. Wool fibers, 15, 25 microns. Asbestos fibers, that which is considered to be a serious health and environmental concern, are on the order of 2 to 3 microns thick. The material that I'm speaking of is composed of fibers that is 2 to 3 tenths of a micron thick. This means it's invisible to your eye, essentially. This was an unusual case where this material appeared on the ground really in direct connection with the aircraft activity that we're speaking of. Some of the material was photographed falling through the air.
In other words, it might have been sprayed, didn't dissipate the way it was supposed to, clumped together, fell to the ground.
It has to be considered as anomalous, not expected. This particular one sample was